All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome as we're letting everyone in and everyone is getting settled into the Zoom. Welcome to the third meeting of the task force, this City of Somerville Anti-Displacement Task Force. Um, if you have been following our progress, this is our third meeting where we're giving updates to our progress. This meeting has been dedicated now to listening to some youth experiences regarding our city. We have presentations, special presentations from the Harvard Kennedy School, the John F. Kennedy School of Government. Our economic development department has worked with the Harvard Kennedy School to get some information on displacement and mitigating displacement with small businesses in our community. So we're going to be hearing from Ted Fields, who will be presenting on behalf of the Harvard Kennedy School students that worked with us. Unfortunately, they're not able to be here due to scheduling conflicts, but Ted has worked with them closely all along the process, so he'll be able to give us the overview of the findings from their report. Additionally, we'll be hearing from the Department of Racial and Social Justice for the City of Somerville, the Youth League. We have individuals from the Somerville High School, I believe, who will be presenting and giving us their perspectives on their findings on displacement and gentrification in the City of Somerville. They'll also be leading us out of this meeting with a reflection exercise as well to make sure that we are walking away with some information that we can take and apply to our committee meetings moving forward. So I'm just going to give everyone a brief overview in case you are new to the task force and you're just tuning in and wanting to know more about what we have been doing, what we have been up to. So if you can see my screen, I'm sharing the task force timeline that was originally shared in the previous meeting. And this is a good time to plug that we actually recorded our last two task force wide meetings. So feel free to log on to our summer voice page, which is voice.somervillema.gov /ADTF. And I'll put that in the chat as well. But that is our page that we're communicating with the public with through to give the public updates on what's going on with our task force. And you'll find also recordings of our previous task force wide meetings, as well as our listening sessions for the residential displacement committees listening sessions they held while they were developing the home rule petition for rent stabilization for the city of Somerville. So this timeline here essentially is just going over what we propose our timeline would be at the beginning of our project. And it looks like we're for the most part on track with that. The Residential Displacement Committee has taken on the home rule petition process. So that is a little bit of a unique process. And so they're on a slightly different track than the rest of the committees, but still on track to get this done for our ultimate goal of having a report completed by the summer of 2024. So as of right now, where we are right now is moving this January 4th deadline here for task force wide updates. We're actually replacing that with today's day, February 15th, where we'll be doing our listening session. Our next meeting, task force wide, will be the 2nd of May in 2024, where we will be, excuse me, we will be doing our presentation of findings that the three committees will be giving to the community about what we have found to be the top priorities in displacement and where we should be focusing our efforts and resources. So this is just showing us where we are right now, February 15th. And just a quick update on what we have done so far. And I just want to take a moment to shout out our Residential Displacement Committee. We have completed the home rule petition process on our part of the city of Somerville. And this is no small feat through the involvement of the Residential Displacement Committee, through the involvement of our counselors who serve on the committee, Counselor Judy Pineda-Neufeld, who's just arrived, and Ben Ewan Campen, and hard work of our committee led by Morena Zelaya and Jill Courier and Counselor, or rather Nicole Egbert from CAS. We were able to get this across the finish line. It is now at the state level and will be undergoing review, and hopefully we'll be able to give more updates as that progresses. And if it is approved, then we'll be able to start the process of drafting an actual ordinance for the rent stabilization. So that's a separate process that would happen, but started with the Residential Displacement Committee's efforts, concentrated on this for the first 4 months or so of the task force's progress. This is what the Residential Displacement Committee has just kind of completed, and so now they're on their way to develop their own priorities for their regular agenda, along with the other two committees, the Small Enterprise Displacement Committee and the Creative Displacement Committee. So I just wanted to give that as an update and as an opportunity for everyone to get caught up to where we are and give some context before we jump into our two meetings. But having done that, we'll go ahead and get started. Is Ted, you're here. Will you be needing anybody else to for this presentation, or will it just be you?
It will just be me.
Right. I'm just going to pull up that presentation.
Okay.
And we can go ahead and get started. So we'll have the two presentations. After each presentation, we'll have some time for our community to provide any questions or comments to the presentations. Please use the question or answer feature through Zoom, or you can put it in a chat. And if you have any issues, maybe see if you can raise your hand and I'll try to address those as they come up. But we will go ahead and get started. One moment. All right, Ted, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Louise, and thank you all for being here today. My name is Ted Fields. I'm a senior planner in the Economic Development Division of the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development. And this past year, as our department was participating in the Davis Square Small Area Planning Initiative, we heard a lot of concern among small businesses in the area, as well as our other small business partners and Main Street's partners in other parts of the city express deep concern about displacement of businesses, of small establishments, of cultural institutions that really make Somerville the unique and interesting and desirable place that it is, and that people want to come to, live in, and work in. And the 2040 master plan, Summer Vision document acknowledges this and places a high importance on encouraging new development that is complementary and suitable for the city, but that also doesn't disrupt existing businesses and institutions that contribute to the city's character. So with that in mind, our staff, led by myself, started thinking about how we could really face commercial displacement head on and try to help businesses that are threatened with displacement or undergoing displacement, but also how we could prevent it in the future from happening through our land permitting processes and our zoning processes in particular. And we drew up our ideas and our concepts, but we really wanted to research them more in depth and test them and see what other cities and towns across America were doing to confront this problem. And to do that, we reached out to Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and through the Rappaport program, we assembled a 5-person research team comprised of students from the Kennedy School and from the Graduate School of Design. And I worked with them over 4 months to compile the study that I'm presenting tonight. Next slide, please. So these are the students who worked with me on this study. Jeannie Liu, Elena Nyland, Pat Olson, Shannon Jan, and Joy Zhang. Most of them are still in school, and they unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, but they're following the progress of the study and the positive reviews that has gotten with great interest. Next slide, please.
They haven't even begun
So
reporting.
the study goes out to look at three areas. It looks at how we can map commercial rents and vacancies and prepare an ongoing detailed picture of the risk of commercial displacement in different parts of the city. Somerville's different commercial districts have different threats from displacement. So we want to try to see if we can assemble high quality, but also very detailed granular data so we can tease out where the risks are greatest and address those in a timely way. Then we had the students look at assisting businesses that are undergoing displacement or who are threatened with immediate disruption or displacement. See how we can really help them to stay in their places of business or relocate to new places within the city. And then finally, we looked at ways to prevent as much as possible disruption and displacement of our valuable and unique small businesses through our permitting processes and especially our zoning ordinance. So next slide, please. Next slide. Thanks. So again, with preparation, we were really focused on assembling our maps and geographic information system to provide insights on the commercial property market to help us spot hot spots of displacement among businesses. For the assistance portion, we really had the students investigate how we can provide financial assistance and business service assistance to organizations and enterprises that are disrupted or being displaced by new development and construction activity. And then finally, as I mentioned, with prevention, we really focused on what sort of zoning policies could prevent or mitigate future commercial displacement. Next slide, please. So this was done through a variety of research methods outlined here. Very quickly, the first two involved field study, listening to small businesses, and listening to stakeholders in the development arena, both on the city side and in the private market, getting their perceptions about the different facets of commercial disruption and displacement and how the city could manage and prevent that from happening. Then we had the students investigate and compile high quality financial data and what we call geospatial or map data to help us map displacement and also study it and study how we could intervene effectively in preventing it. And then finally, the students looked at best practices from across the United States to see what other cities and towns are doing to fight commercial displacement and what Somerville could feasibly borrow from them in that regard. So very quickly on the preparation front, next slide, please. Thanks. The students broke the task of preparing a commercial displacement geographic information system into three parts. Very quickly, the first part was to acquire high quality data on businesses in Somerville, rents they were paying, sales, and combining that with basic property data like building height, year built, zoning, And then also other factors that influence the commercial property market, such as the Green Line, construction of the Green Line extension, bike lane and bike path improvements, permitting and whatnot. From there, from assembling the data, they researched how to create risk indicators. And then from the multiple indicators they worked on a method to combine those indicators into a single risk assessment. Next slide, please. And so this slide just shows some of the elements that went into developing the model you'll see in a second. And this is a visual example of some of the data that they compiled. These are the number of businesses. Next slide, please. These are small businesses kind of singled out and mapped. Next slide, please. This is a map of blocks and where businesses were moved into and where they moved out of in recent years. Next slide, please. This is a look at business rents. Next slide, please. This is a look at combining, where the blocks where rents increased and where they decreased. Next slide, please. This is a look at building height. We had heard anecdotally from a number of small business operators and owners that they were very concerned about being located in 1 or 2 story buildings because those were seen as the most ripe for complete redevelopment and potential displacement of existing commercial tenants. So we mapped these in this slide. Next slide, please. We also looked at the proximity of businesses to the new Green Line extension, shown by this green line running through the middle of the city. And then we also started combining all this data into multiple maps where you have small buildings, the Green Line extension. And then finally, this slide shows how the students combine a number of different data and risk indicators to make one overall assessment. Next slide, please, which is shown here, which looks at all these factors and gives you an overall score of displacement risk among businesses in the city's different wards. And as you can see, the risk with this method is highest around the Boynton Yards area, the Union Square area, and over in the Brick Bottom area, kind of in the southeastern part of the city. And as well as along the Broadway corridor and the Highland Ave corridor, as well as in Magoon Square and Ball Square. And which is not surprising, but it's good for us to see exactly where the risks are highest so we can target the city's resources in the areas where they'll make most impact. And in terms of providing assistance, we started looking at how to help businesses being displaced or threatened with displacement, first by talking to local businesses and what their concerns were. And again, we're going to go pretty quickly through these slides, but they were concerned about lacking long-term leases or not getting lease renewals. Next slide, please. The power dynamics with landlords. A number of business owners are hesitant to talk to their landlord about making improvements or fixing conditions because they're afraid they'll raise rents. Next slide, please. There's a shortage of affordable space to relocate to, either short-term or long-term, as existing commercial properties are redeveloped. Next slide, please. There's also a concern that new commercial spaces, especially ground floor retail spaces, are too expensive for existing small businesses to move into. Next slide, please. There is a concern that demographic changes and evolving neighborhood residential patterns are changing the clientele that existing businesses have. So, for example, there are many ethnic stores, and in some cases, when we interviewed the owners of those stores, they have noticed that a lot of their former clientele have moved elsewhere out of the city within the greater Boston area. And that is forcing them to adapt. And that's a stressor for them. Next slide, please. There's a concern that beyond just rents rising, construction is disruptive, and it can create delays that makes businesses that are affected by delays more vulnerable. Next slide, please. And there's just a general anxiety about what the future holds. Many small business owners welcome new development, but they're afraid under current conditions they might be forced to relocate and not realize the benefits that new development will bring to the city. Next slide, please. So after we talked with them about what their concerns were, the research team asked businesses, how do you want the city to help? And their responses were very nuanced. They didn't just want direct financial assistance from the city. First, they said, please make the city's access to information, especially about development and development permitting, more centralized and easier to use. Make the city services and information flow friendlier, more flexible, and faster. Next slide, please. Provide greater upfront information.
Excuse me for interrupting, Ted. I think you're behind by a couple of slides.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thanks.
Luis, can you go back? Or I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. You need to go forward.
Forward, yeah. One more. Yep, and then one more again. Thank you, Luis. All right, sorry, it's hard when I'm not controlling the slides. We're doing our best, though. Thank you. So there was also concern, as I said, about better communication and more communication, especially upfront about new developments, their status, and what their potential impacts could be for neighboring businesses. Next slide, please. And finally, many businesses say they feel heard, especially when talking with their local councilors and representatives in the city. But they would really love, if possible, more of a say in how planning is done and how zoning is made and whatnot. Next slide, please. And in terms of city services and funding, the businesses that researchers talked to acknowledge that city financial support and programs are very helpful, especially those that help improve their business capacity, that will help them be better business owners, run more efficient operations, and will make more revenue so that they can weather potential disruption and displacement in a better way. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thanks. Financial assistance is welcome, especially even small amounts for many smaller neighborhood businesses. Unexpected bills of even $1,000 or $500 or $4,000 can really impact and harm a business. So any funding that the city can provide is welcome and helpful. There's also a specific concern that many new entrepreneurs or small businesses don't have access to enough capital to build out spaces or to improve or enlarge spaces to allow them to expand their operations and to earn more revenues. Next slide, please. There's also, okay, I think you're a little bit ahead, but that's okay. One back. Yep. There's also a desire for, short-term assistance for temporary setbacks, relocation funding if businesses have to relocate, helping with brokerage services to find a new place, and also capital to fit out a new space for a business. Those are the most frequently desired forms of assistance. Next slide, please. Thank you. So after hearing what our local business owners want, the researchers went out and researched best practices from across the country to find out what other communities are doing to help businesses with financial assistance or programming assistance. They found two examples that Somerville can learn a lot from. The first was from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where the Ready for Rail loan program had a great success in providing zero interest, forgivable loans up to $20,000 to businesses in transit corridors that were disrupted by improvements, construction of improvements or construction of new rail lines. This came in the form of both cash as well as assistance with business services like accounting, tax filing, marketing support. And this provided close to $4 million to 200 small businesses in what they called the Central Corridor, where there was a lot of transit improvements being made from 2012 to 2014. Next slide, please. A similar program was operated by the Los Angeles metro area. The Business Interruption Fund operated or provided larger grants to businesses in rail corridors where construction was occurring. Businesses could get up to $50,000 or 60% of their revenues if they were losing revenue from construction activity. There was an online application portal backed up with one-on-one business advisor support. And this is an ongoing program. To date, they've awarded nearly $33 million to over 400 small businesses. And they're providing about $10 million annually. Next slide, please. So very quickly, the researchers, after finding these best practices, they really looked at the elements of how to design a short-term assistance program. They looked at what type of assistance the city could provide, eligibility requirements, what sort of funding requirements. Next slide, please. As well as how to administer the program and how to communicate the program. And we use these findings to help design our economic development department's ARPA small business program. We're using that as a pilot to develop a longer term program of business support, especially for businesses that are threatened with or facing disruption or displacement. Next slide, please. Finally, looking at prevention, we had the research team with the help of a real estate professional who's also a small-scale real estate developer, develop or do a financial analysis using a specialized method called a pro forma financial analysis to model development of mixed-use housing projects with commercial ground floor elements, as well as mixed lab and office projects. and really look at the finances of those types of projects and whether there were zoning incentives that could help incentivize developers to make at least part of their ground floor retail space affordable. And so there were a number of assumptions involved in this type of analysis. And here an example of a few here, but what we found with this initial analysis that in these type of projects that we see a lot of in Somerville, ground floor retail income is really a small part of the overall development's profit. And next slide, please. Especially with taller projects, the amount of income derived from retail space gets smaller and smaller. And next slide, please. And what that means is that with larger projects, but even smaller projects, offering or having developers allocate half of their ground floor retail space at affordable rents is really not a big hit. It's not a big impact on their bottom line. When we ran this model and we had half of the ground floor retail space capped at 50% of market rents, that decreased developers' profits by about 5 or 10%. In smaller, shorter projects, it was more towards 10%. In taller projects, it was more like 5%. And this was very encouraging. Next slide, please. And what that led us to a key insight in that we could tailor zoning incentives for property owners to make ground floor retail completely affordable or partially affordable in exchange for height bonuses. If we offered a program of height bonuses for affordable retail, that would have very minimal or potentially no impact on their profits. And this seemed to be a very promising finding and a very promising area for future research. Especially in terms of the strength of the incentive, what types of affordability we are seeking, and how we implement that in our zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. And so here are some of the elements of this research that we are in the process of starting with our development consultants. Next slide, please. There's a lot of elements to this that we really need to tease out. But we really think it's a promising area of potential impact for us. Next slide, please. And then finally, very quickly, we looked at BIPOC-led community investment funds. Again, in Minneapolis, they've had success with a revolving loan fund for their North Side neighborhood that supports for-profit BIPOC developers combat gentrification through community-oriented development. The assessment of the researchers was that due to our city's high real estate, our hot real estate market, and high prices, a revolving loan fund is not terribly feasible without a substantial upfront initial investment. Next slide, please. So from all this research, the final part of the study was an action plan on how to start implementing this. And this is what we're currently following in our economic development division right now. In terms of the preparation, we're assembling a specialized commercial database, geographic information system with high quality, detailed building data, rent data, so that we can start developing our own risk assessments for commercial displacement and keep that updated and communicate that through the city's website and other channels. As I mentioned, with business assistance, we are using ARPA funds on a pilot small business program developed with the help of the findings of our study in terms of business coaching programs, financial assistance, and a fit out program for vacant spaces. And then finally, with prevention, we are starting to research zoning incentives, especially density bonuses for affordable retail space in our commercial districts. Next slide, please. So that is that's a summary of the Harvard commercial displacement study. We had a fabulous team of researchers. They really performed admirably and beyond our expectations. So I just want to acknowledge their wonderful work. And Louise, I'm available for questions. If you want to hold questions, I'm happy to answer them later. Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, we got time for questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to take questions first from our task force committee members. And then while that's happening, if anyone is in the chat as an attendee, feel free to submit a question using the Q&A option on the Zoom app itself. We've had one question that came through, which was, would we be able to make this session recording available? This session is being recorded, and we will be posting this to our Summer Voice page. I put the link in that response, but I'll put the request or the link in the chat as well. So that's voice.somervillema.gov/ADTF, where you'll be able to find this recording along with the recording of our previous sessions, along with our listening sessions that was part of our residential displacement committee work as well. So while we're answering questions from the committee, if you have any questions on that you'd like to submit, feel free to submit those questions and we'll be getting to those afterwards. So first, I think I had Jill's hand up. Oh, maybe not. Penny.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. I guess I was just wondering, now that you've identified some areas that are hotspots for displacement, if there is any plan to talk to some more business owners in those specific places, like Magoon occurs to me. Thank you.
Oh, yes, we are. As a matter of fact, we have just started a collaborative initiative with our regional planning agency to develop a commercial tenants guidebook that educates commercial tenants about their rights and about the importance of obtaining a lease and how to negotiate a fair lease, and where to go if they have problems with their landlords or if they need financial assistance. And as part of that, we are doing more field research. We were block walking in Davis Square yesterday, and we'll be doing more block walking in other commercial districts of the city throughout this month. So yes, we are talking with small businesses, and we plan to keep talking to small businesses. We have a new small business liaison planner who has regular office hours that businesses can drop in on. It's virtual, and she can help them with permits. She can help them with troubleshoot problems. She can answer questions. Yeah, she's a wonderful resource that we added about 7 months ago. So we're continually striving to help small businesses as much as we can.
And Penny, I just want to mention that Penny is working with us in our residential displacement committee, supporting the committee's work. And if any other committee members have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and just give us a little bit about give us a little intro about your role in the committee so that folks in the attendance can also know as well. Ellen. Oh, Ellen's in our audience, actually. Let us take questions here that we have on our Q&A app first, and then we'll go into raised hands in the attendees. Ellen, if you do have a question, I would request if you could put it in the Q&A feature, and we can get to the question that way. But the first question we have here, where there's cities of comparable size that have worked to support local small businesses. I think the question is asking how we were able to, how did we choose the cities that we used in the study as far as comparables, and how what
Sure.
what qualities did we choose for comparable cities?
Because not a lot of cities offer small business programming or really seek to help small businesses fight displacement, we made the decision to cast a wide net and look at all cities that have dedicated anti-displacement policies. And for space limitations, we focused on the two that were most relevant and seemed to be most replicable by Somerville. There were findings by the researchers from smaller sized cities like Somerville, but they weren't as effective or as applicable as the Minneapolis and the Los Angeles example, which also seem to be scalable to cities of our size fairly easily. So for that reason, those two were included. If we had capacity for a longer or a larger study, we could certainly include those. And I can talk with the research team and try to get some other examples too.
Ted, the next question we had from the audience, how does this policy / systemic change recommendations for small businesses interact with issues of residential displacement? For example, if developers are giving incentives to lowering commercial space rents, they may be less willing to keep more housing under market rate.
That is a very interesting question that we're actually working on with our real estate consultants. We're having a real estate consultant stress test the financial modeling that we did, as well as to help tease out some of the details of zoning incentives, like Ms. Cash mentions in her question. We have looked at preliminarily whether we can incentivize the provision of both affordable retail space and affordable, greater amounts of affordable housing in exchange for height bonuses in mixed residential retail projects, for example. So we realize that there is a potential interaction there. We're researching some of those potential effects and how they will inform if we change our zoning to incentivize affordable commercial space.
I think we have a hand up from Ellen. I think it's our Ellen from the Residential
Yeah.
Displacement Committee. Go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry, my internet's been spotty, but hi, Ellen Schachter, Office of Housing Stability on the Residential Subcommittee. And first, I just really wanted to congratulate you. I think this is really, really interesting, well done, well framed. And I'm just struck by how many parallels there are with residential displacement.
Oh, thanks. And in that vein, there are definitely similarities. For example, as I said, we're looking at, offering height bonuses can be a very effective way to have developers voluntarily increase the amount of affordable housing they provide in their projects. So this type of research can be applicable to the residential displacement arena as well as commercial displacement.
So, thank you. And again, my internet's stable. So that's why if I'm stopping. But one of the things I'm interested in that you pointed to is the research on how effective incentives are versus mandatory requirements. And I just know in the residential context, there's been a lot of research to show that incentives didn't really work very well. Voluntary incentives didn't work that well, which is why there sort of was this real move towards figuring out what the limits of what we can require is under the Constitution and everything else. But I'm really curious to hear, I know that's going to be ongoing research, but to hear what you find out about sort of if there are any models, but what the success of the voluntary kind of incentives are within the small business context. And it may be that it's more successful because, as you were saying, the profit margin in small businesses, the percentage of profit may be lower in the, mixed.
Right.
That might very well be the case. But anyway, I just wanted to make that point into, let you know that I'm really interested in that. And I don't know if you have seen yet any research on kind of the effectiveness of the voluntary incentives, but
to date, no. This is rather from what our researchers found and what we can find in our research. This is rather new, innovative ground that not a lot of people have looked at. So there's not a lot of evidence about the effectiveness of voluntary or height incentives with affordable commercial space. That's why, because of the lack of research and data out there that we can find, we're asking our real estate consultants to really look at this and make sure that the model is robust and that they can replicate the findings as we go forward. And I think a lot of the reasons that voluntary incentives, at least in the residential sphere, might not have worked as well as desired could be, it's the strength of the incentive, and is the incentive worth the requirements for affordable space that you are getting in exchange. And that's one of the areas that we're looking at very carefully with our zoning planners is how can we offer effective incentives, attractive incentives for especially ground floor retail space that are still complements the city zoning and still complements the city's built environment. So there's a lot of research still left to undertake to get the right type of zoning incentives in place.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm very interested to see what you continue to learn about that on that front. So thank you.
Next we have Eric.
Perfect, thanks. So I'm Eric Grobsky-Huntley. I'm the incoming co-chair of the residential subcommittee of the Anti-Displacement Task Force. And first of all, the report is great. I actually my day job is teaching GIS and mapping and spatial analysis at MIT in the urban planning department, and it's great to see such strong work coming out of this partnership. I guess I have I think two related questions. One is if there are any plans to release the results of some of these studies as open data sets via the Somerville Open Data Portal or something like that, so that the so that some of these results can maybe inform other studies. I know that when you're dealing with individual parcel level projections, that can be kind of tricky. You don't want to be too prescriptive, all that kind of stuff. But I think it would be interesting to examine. And then I guess the second one is, whenever, I don't know, again, I teach this kind of stuff, and whenever my students are putting together measures of risk, it's always kind of a, we're using current conditions to project risk to businesses. And I guess I'm wondering if there are any plans. One thing that rarely happens with this kind of thing is seeing, 2-3 years down the line, what the sort of success rate of those risk projections is. If there are any plans to do sort of a follow-up to see if the risk levels assigned to particular places actually bear out in some kind of
That's
in some kind of way.
that's a great observation. I would love to do that. We're still kind of staffing up our department. So a lot of it has to, a lot of what we do has to fit with our current bandwidth, which is rapidly being consumed with our various projects. So we are planning to work as much as we can in developing the commercial displacement GIS as a module within our larger city GIS, as much as our time allows and our staffing allows. But I would love to talk with you offline further about how we could potentially do some of these look back studies on risk assessment, periodically in an efficient way, along with migrating the study data to the open data format.
Thank you so much, and again, thanks for all the work so far. I know it's no small feat. So thanks for all that you are doing.
No, you're welcome.
So we have time for 2 more questions. So I'm going to take Jen's hand now, and we have maybe one more question from the Q&A that we can get to. But go ahead, Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen Harrington, co-chair of the Creative Committee. One of the comments from one of the small business owners really resonated with me in that people were leaving loyal customers, and that was part of the hurt that was happening to their business. And we've talked a lot at arts community meetings about communication. And I'm wondering if you're exploring, and I realize this is like probably a separate project altogether, exploring the human factor, communication. How can people learn about our local businesses, which should be considered assets, especially if they're independently run? As I've been putting together, here are lists of, buildings that have gone away. People have been able to say, oh, I didn't realize we've been losing so much. I wasn't keeping track. But before we lose things, can there be a list somewhere? Can an owner identify themselves somewhere in a database and say, I have a restaurant, it's in this area, I serve vegan food. And then somebody from Union Square could go, well, I'm going to go to Ball Square now because there's somewhere that can serve me. And I can branch out, that type of thing.
That's an excellent question. We are developing lists of businesses, and as you know, a list of business changes all the time as businesses are formed, and as they go out of business, or they move, or they expand. So it takes constant, regular research to keep a list of businesses current and accurate. My colleague Felipe Donato, who's on the webinar, is doing a fabulous job cataloging our local businesses. It's a lot of street level research, literally going up and down the streets of our commercial districts, cataloging each individual business. It's a big job, but we're doing it on a regular basis so that we have as accurate an assessment as we can compile at any one time. and making sure that's as current as we can make it. And then we're always looking at ways that we can work with our partners in the main streets organizations in the city, as well as newer merchants associations that are springing up in our commercial districts, to share that information that we have, to market the city's businesses as effectively as possible, not just to our residents, but also to people and businesses throughout the greater Boston area. So yes, we are doing that. Again, we have limited staff, but we're trying to do as much as we can, and we're always trying to do what we're doing in a better way as much as possible.
Okay, we have one last question. Hello there. The model and incentives still assume businesses will be renting. Did you consider helping businesses own their space?
We did, and we did not address that in this study, but we have been started to collaborate with the City of Cambridge and the Redevelopment Authority in studying what a variation of a community land trust that would be focused on acquiring or renting commercial real estate and either subletting or leasing to small local businesses at affordable rates. That's a project that will take a longer time to design and to fund. But we are considering that. As a matter of fact, I just spoke with the Regional Planning Agency, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, about obtaining grant funding to have them start studying that with our help, and to really look at how something like that could be put together. They're very interested in that concept. It hasn't really been done very much in Massachusetts, but we think it would be valuable to start researching how that could be done under Massachusetts law, and how we could start that, what type of funding would be required, how that should be administered and whatnot. So we are considering that, but it's a big project and will take a while to really form a program like that, if that is feasible for the city.
And we just are at time. So David, if you have a quick question, feel free.
Sure, very quick. Ted, thank you. This was a great presentation. I just wanted to make sure you were aware that our existing community land trust has considered exactly that kind of activity.
Oh, great.
And would certainly want to be part of that conversation.
That's wonderful. I would love to talk with you offline. That's great.
At
And
your
David, you
leisure.
want to just to give us a quick bio from you, just so the audience is aware?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I'm the executive director of the Community Action Agency of Somerville. I also am on the board of directors of the Somerville Community Land Trust.
Great. I'll talk with you soon.
All right. Thank you so much for this presentation. It has been so informative, and I hope everyone in the audience has been able to get something out of this and glean some insights. I know that there's a lot more work to do as far as paving that roadway towards preventing displacement in our small business community. But we are working along that pathway, and the Small Enterprise Displacement Committee has been doing a lot of work, and not only coming up with priorities and looking for pathways to research, but also implementing them as they go. So I want to just give also a huge shout out to the Small Enterprise Displacement Committee, who is literally flying the plane or building the plane as they fly it, and they're doing a great job at that. So thank you so much, Ted, for the presentation, and we continue to look forward to hearing more from your group.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Next, we will be transitioning over to our next presentation. Amanda, I believe you should have privileges to share your screen, but we will be now hearing from our Department of Racial and Social Justice Youth League. And Amanda, you're free to take it away whenever. There you go. All right, great.
Thank you, Louise. Good evening to the Anti-Displacement Task Force and invited guests. Thank you for having us. My name is Amanda Najim Williams, and I'm the coordinator for the Department of Racial and Social Justice. I'm joined tonight by Elijah Booker, RSJ's project specialist, and the RSJ Youth League. The RSJ Youth League conducted their study during the spring of 2023 with the help of students at the Harvard Graduate School of Education through a Critical Participatory Action Research Program, also known as CPAR. Critical Participatory Action Research is an epistemology that engages research design, methods, analysis, and products through a lens of democratic participation. Through this program, young people are trained to design and implement research of relevance to their communities. The program draws on the brilliance of young people to identify and investigate both issues and possibilities, building from their research to recommend and implement strategies for change. As you see on the screen, Critical Participatory Action Research is an epistemology that engages research design, methods, analyses, and products through a lens of democratic participation. CPAR projects are rooted in the belief that those most impacted by research should take the lead in framing the questions, design, methods, analysis, and determining what products and actions might be most useful in affecting change. CPAR projects are built on the assumption that what is seen as real has been shaped by social, political, cultural, economic, ethnic, and gender factors. As such, CPAR projects do not seek to discover immutable truths. Rather, projects investigate the social patterns which function as truths in people's everyday lives. Unlike traditional post-positive approaches, which seek to control for bias or mitigating factors, CPAR researchers strive to name and explore different ways in which positionality, context, and power impact their findings. To be valid, findings must be situated in the local context, participatory, transformative, and authentic for the local context. And finally, CPAR projects bring together traditional and non-traditional research methods. And with that, I will pass it to our first Youth League member.
Hello, everyone. This is our team. We have Rajesh, Jay, Marcus, and me, Marcia. We also had Dennis, Evelyn, and Jen. However, they graduated from Harvard and we are continuing their work. Next slide, please.
All right, so what is the RSJ Youth League? We were created, actually the predecessor to this RSJ Youth League was created with Harvard Graduate School of Education students and Somerville youth around a couple years back with the objective of doing research on what a youth league would look like in our local government. And then last year, this group was hired to work with a new team of Harvard students as a more official youth league and carry out our own research. For the youth league, CPAR means that we as youth of Somerville were involved in nearly every step of this research, and we were researching our own community. We looked into our community and our own experiences to inform discussions of possible research questions and help to contextualize the data we gathered in our knowledge and experiences living in Somerville. The Youth League employs youth to voice our perspective in Somerville. A large part of our work has been the research we did with the Harvard students that we wish to use to improve our community in Somerville. Following the final presentation of our research at Harvard, we regrouped over the summer and discussed next steps, including preparing for this presentation and others. We're also looking at what the Youth League will look like in the future, as we're all seniors and are graduating this year. Next slide.
So for our research context, we looked at where is Somerville inequitable. We found that Somerville was inequitable in housing, food, zoning, schools, etc. So then next, we looked where can we target these problems? And then we looked at Somerville as a whole, and we realized that there are communities in Somerville, like Ball Square, Gilman Square, and Winter Hill. We researched this problem through census tracts, personal experiences, and other data. We also had preliminary data from the previous RSJ, and we used that for our research question 1 and 2 that you will see later in the presentation. We collected data through the American Community Survey and the Somerville Youth Survey. We presented the data to the mayor, and now we are presenting to the Anti-Displacement Task Force, and we are also presenting it to the public. Next slide, please. Before we start, we wanted to ask you guys 2 questions. How have you seen the city of Somerville change over the course of your time here? When you think about the Somerville you would want to live in, who would live there? Feel free to write these down or put it in a notes app somewhere. Next slide, please.
So, how did we create our research question? We first started with a general brainstorm asking what issues of racial and social justice in the city of Somerville should the Youth Council address. One of the main responses with high agreement was gentrification. We then moved on to asking what would city change be? A major result from that question was more equity between racial groups and different demographics. And finally, this led us to coming with 2 specific research questions that I will display later. So, in conclusion, we reflected on data from the previous years, and we started brainstorming questions that we would need to answer to address matters of racial and social justice. Next slide, please. So, for the research questions we did come up with, number 1, what does income inequality and segregation look like in Somerville? How, if at all, do different racial and ethnic groups in Somerville differ in terms of income and where they live, and how has this changed over time? Our second question was, how do students in Somerville talk about and experience gentrification? In what ways do these demographic changes affect their lived experiences and opportunities in school? Next slide.
So just to reiterate, research question 1 is, what does income inequality and segregation look like in Somerville? How, if at all, do different racial/ethnic groups in Somerville differ in terms of income and where they live? And finally, how has this changed over time? When we look at the data collection approach, for step 1, we communicated with our RSJ data analysts. The second was pulling from the census. Although we know the census isn't perfect, it definitely helps to identify trends and patterns in populations, and we thought it was important to utilize for this data collection approach. In step 2, the Harvard Graduate Students of Education wrote the R code and then developed data visualizations in Tableau. For step 3, the Harvard graduate students led a data analysis mini lesson with the Youth League. And finally, they had a co-analysis of census tract data.
So to create the graphs on the following slides, we retrieved census tract data from the American Community Survey, median household income by census tract by year. Some issues with the data we collected was that we did not know the sample sizes for the census tract data. The census tracts themselves changed over time. The data collection was inconsistent by racial group, and also that census tracts do not always align directly onto neighborhoods. Keeping this in mind, there are still a lot of comparisons that we can make using these graphs.
So for this first neighborhood, Teal Square is a neighborhood in West Somerville amid gentrification with old Clarendon Hill housing projects that were once affordable housing for residents undergoing renovations. Next slide, please. The graph here shows Black, white/non-Hispanic, Asian, and Hispanic residents' median household income by race over time for residents in the Teal Square area. As seen in the graph, there is a huge discrepancy in total median income between Black and Hispanic residents compared to Asian and white residents. The total median income between Black and Hispanic residents with the most recent data is as low as $12,000 and $16,000 respectively, yet for white and Asian residents, the median income most recently is $87,000 for white residents and 95,000 for Asian residents. Quite obviously, there is a huge and worrying difference. But at the same time, Black and Hispanic residents' median incomes have declined since the data began in 2013, whereas white and Asian residents' incomes are increasing over time. There is a steady gain of wealth for white residents over time in the Teal Square area, yet a trend of a loss of median yearly income for Black and Hispanic residents. Asian residents also started off with a lower median income similar to that of Black residents in the beginning of the data, but starting in 2014, there was a major shift, so eventually, Asian residents now have the highest median household income by race with 95,000. So, there is the issue of Black and Hispanic household median incomes starting lower as evidenced by the graph, but Black and Hispanic incomes are also alarmingly decreasing at the same time. Next slide, please.
This area of Teal Square is near Davis Square. Next slide, please. In my experience, this part of Somerville in the West has been traditionally wealthy compared to other parts of Somerville. You can see by the multi-tiered houses and the yards and the abundance of space that this looks like a particularly wealthy area. Next slide, please. Even looking at the closest neighborhood school, the West Somerville, we can tell you that the racial diversity has dropped in the last 5 years. Next slide, please. So looking at this census tract, we can see that the lowest line for 2013 was at $91,250, which was one of the highest median household incomes by race in 2019 for the previous graph, which is really concerning to see because even between the same neighborhood, you're seeing the wealth gap be drastically different. And that means that the wealth gap is getting bigger over time. And this graph also has the highest median income out of all of the graphs that you're going to see today at $160K, which also shows that this place has the highest median income by race out of all of Somerville, which supports the fact that they are a particularly wealthy place. Something else that you will see with the other graphs today is that consistently the Black and Hispanic residents are on the bottom half of the graph, and it just keeps decreasing over time. But especially with this graph, you can see that there is a lot of a lack of data after like the year 2015, 2017, because when there's drops off in data like that, that means that either there's not enough people responding to the census tract or there's just not enough people in that neighborhood anymore. However, in this graph, you can tell that the white resident line is going up steadily, and I think that's a trend you're going to see a lot today. Next slide, please.
This next graph shows us the median household income by race of residents living in the Winter Hill and Ten Hills area of Somerville. This area, unlike nearby Assembly Square area, appears to be a lower income area of Somerville. In this graph, we can see a lot of interesting trends. Looking at the highest median income on this graph gives a good first impression. The highest median income on this graph is just under $100,000, which is significantly below many median incomes recorded in the other census tracts in Somerville that we're looking at today. In 2013, the highest median household income in this census tract was at around $55,000. When compared to the highest median household income in 2013 in all the other graphs you are looking at today, this is the lowest. Another interesting trend is between 2013 and 2017. The lines representing the white, non-Hispanic, Black, and Asian populations' household incomes stay very stable during this time, suggesting that this area of Somerville stayed relatively unchanged during that time. This trend, however, has changed significantly in the 1 year between 2017 and 2018. The median household incomes of every group except for the Hispanic residents rise. The largest increase in this year being of Black households with a startling increase of nearly $20,000. It would be interesting to look further into why this spike happened. It could be an effect of census tracts being redrawn or increasing wages in Somerville. It could also be more people moving in together to save money, or an effect of the lower income families being forced to move out of Somerville due to rising rents amid gentrification. Overall, it is clear that this area of Somerville is more impacted by poverty despite being right next to the Assembly Square area, which you'll hear about next.
I think Brajesh might be having audio issues.
Hello?
We can hear you now.
All right, thanks. Let me start from the beginning. All right. So Assembly Row is filled with more than 40 national brands, outlets, and unique shops. We can find almost everything in the Assembly, including parks and recreational activities. However, it is known for being an expensive place to live. Next slide. Looking over the median household income in this graph, the white household income is over $80,000, while the best black household income is missing from the data. It could be because of the smaller black population in the area. In 2016, the black population grew by a few numbers with a median household income of $102,000. This data is probably skewed because of how expensive this place is and only people who effort lives here. Based on the graph, the lowest household income in Assembly is around $61,000 per year, which is way higher than other parts of Somerville. This indicates high living costs in Assembly Row and gentrification in this area. More than 20 restaurants and retailers opening on a rolling basis in 2017. With big brands and outlets opening, the value for Assembly has risen, pushing racial ethnic groups out. When we look at the demographics of the area, the white population dominates while the black population is low. According to data the census.gov, in 2010, the population of white was around 948, while the population of black was only around 90, making white dominant in the area. Next slide.
This part of the presentation will discuss the second research question, which will highlight what the youth are feeling and experiencing around gentrification. Research question 2 asks, how do students in Somerville talk about and experience gentrification? In what ways do these demographic changes affect their lived experiences and opportunities in school? The RSJ Youth League wanted the Somerville Student Gentrification Survey to be focused on the experiences of high school youth in Somerville. After much discussion, the RSJ Youth League determined that a survey would be the fastest way to collect data within the week that they had for survey collection. Once the survey was approved, the RSJ Youth League created survey flyers to distribute at Somerville High School. Most of the distribution took place during lunch periods. In the end, the RSJ Youth League was able to collect 46 responses after promoting the survey for 1 week.
For our participant demographics, for our student race and ethnicity, we had a majority white pool, which isn't reflective of our school, but we do acknowledge that we only had a week to push this survey out. However, we do see that we have a pretty even distribution of student grades. Next slide, please. So for the living arrangement, surprisingly, most people owned their houses, which is going to be interesting when you see a lot of the responses later. However, for the Somerville neighborhoods, we got a pretty even spread from like Winter Hill to East Somerville to Davis Square. Next slide, please.
So we distributed our survey to the students at Somerville High, and we asked several questions regarding their experience with gentrification. On a question where we asked if they had known someone who left Somerville due to gentrification, over 75% of the respondents said yes. Close to 40% of the respondents said they knew more than 3 people who left Somerville for other affordable cities. Of those who left included friends, family, and other close to them. Gentrification in Somerville has been affecting students' relationships, forcing them to leave their friends and move to other cities. Next slide.
So to the left are some of the responses from an open-ended question asking about how students are feeling about gentrification, with the larger words appearing the most often. Some of these most used words include upset, frustrated, worried, sad, concerned, and annoyed. And to the right, there is some quantitative data from where we asked students, how worried are you about the impact that the rising rents and increasing cost of living might have on you and your family, or you and your friends? From this question, we found that approximately 90% of students noted that they are slightly to extremely worried, with 37.2% of students noting that they are somewhat worried and 37.2% of students moderately to extremely worried. Next slide, please.
In one question we asked, in what ways do you see gentrification happening in Somerville? The vast majority of respondents said new housing developments and rising rents, and businesses closing or changing around town. The majority of people also said increases in coffee shops and specialty shops, as well as changes in the racial and ethnic makeup of Somerville. We then asked, of the ways that you see gentrification happening in Somerville, which one do you feel most strongly negatively impacts you? This is why earlier Marcia said it was surprising that most of the respondents said that they owned their homes, because more than half said that rising rents were what most strongly negatively impacted them. And I think that this is indicative of the empathy of Somerville youth, being really worried about family and friends living in Somerville. Many others also said businesses closing or changing around town, and the changes of ethnic and racial makeup of school. Next slide, please. In an open-ended question, we asked, why does this why does this outcome of gentrification impact you the most negatively? And some quotes that we got from this question were, my family is considered low income, so I'm scared we'll have to move.
I live close to businesses that have existed since before I can remember, and the potential of them closing is really sad. I also worry that nearby businesses I rely on closing will make it hard for me to get certain things easily.
I'm afraid that if our rent is raised too high, we won't be able to live here, and I would have to leave all of my friends and my school. It is hard enough with a single parent providing for an entire household. Rising rent only makes it worse.
Friends and families I've known are leaving Somerville. A big community that was in Somerville before are no more. So students has responded with various solutions that they want city to work on. One of them is rent control. Somerville is already working on implementing rent control and is now waiting for state approval. Subsidized housing. There are only few offerings of subsidized housing and not enough for people who wants to live in Somerville. Financial aid, providing family with basic needs such as food, clothing, and financial support. Protecting local business, help local business that are impacted with rising renting costs, increasing RNAs, communicate with the community and discuss topic designated to gentrification. Next slide.
Some of the big takeaways that we saw is that gentrification is having a significant effect on students. Also, especially for sports teams, which isn't something that you usually think about. For the sports teams, a lot of people have seen that the numbers have dropped, and a lot of people are also moving to other cities like Malden or Everett, and you have to end up versing them later in the season. Something that also happens is that you drop down divisions when your school population gets smaller, which is what has happened to us. And youth are also very worried about their futures. Students should be worried about going to school, going to college, and just having a normal everyday today life. However, in Somerville, we're seeing more and more youth worry about, am I going to be able to stay in Somerville? Are my friends going to be able to stay in Somerville? Are the businesses I rely on going to be able to stay here? Diversity has always been a core value and strength of Somerville, and we hope to keep it that way. Next slide, please.
Some next steps that the RSJ Youth League came up with was, first, creating time and space to discuss the big takeaways and questions from this presentation and how they might impact policy. We would like the city to consider holding an event where Somerville families can attend to talk about these topics and discuss what the city hopes to do in the future. Some events that already exist that could facilitate this conversation are the community ward meetings or Civic Day. Other next steps we came up with were highlighting or creating a singular resource page or pages for families with lists of protections and services and resources that low-income families can use if they are struggling, and continuing to make the newsletter more accessible to families. Although we believe that the data that we already collected tells an important story, we also would like to consider collecting data from a larger group of students in Somerville to understand the depth and breadth of the issue across the city.
Now, we once again would like to pose the couple of reflection questions we have for you all. So, how have you seen the city of Somerville change over the course of your time here? And when you think about Somerville you want to live in, who would live there?
I think it might be good to see if we can get the chair's perspective on this to kick us off. And we'll go through with the staff chairs and then the community chairs if they're available. And not all the chairs are here, but yeah, Miranda, if you want to kick us off. Okay, I mean, we can open up to the attendees, or rather the panelists who are here and wish to answer, actually.
Sorry about that.
No, you're
I
good.
just, yep. Thank you so much for this presentation. This was really, really interesting and informative. And I think that it's great to be able to see all these perspectives. And it's not something that's really talked about a lot, at least not in day-to-day work life here. So it's great to sort of be able to put this these questions in the perspectives of people who are being affected by it, that we may not always consider when we're talking about what sort of progress we need to make. So I have personally not been in Somerville for too long. I've been here, I worked for the city for 2 years. So I can't say that I've seen a lot of change over time. I did go to college. I went to BU. I didn't really know a lot of Somerville, a lot about Somerville then. So I can't really comment on that first question. But when I do think about Somerville, my impression is that it is it's a very diverse city, and we want to keep that diversity. We've got people from all walks of life. We've got people from all sorts of incomes. And it's what makes the city what the city is. And when you start pushing people out because they can't, pay the rent, or a business is losing their clientele, you start losing that fabric. You start getting tears in that fabric. And it just becomes sort of a city that you would find anywhere else. You start getting a lot of the stores that you find in like every other major-ish city. And I don't think that that's something that we want to happen in Somerville. I think that we want to keep our unique characteristics and our everything that we offer. So I think that it's important that we keep, we need to be open to having, of course, new people come in, new people breathe fresh air into cities. I'm not saying that, keep everyone out. That's definitely not at all what I intend. But I do think that we should make efforts to make sure that we moderate it so that people who add life to the city are able to stay here.
And I know that we are missing our community co-chair. No, Eric, I think they had to drop off, but I'm going to move on to our small enterprise displacement committee. Ted, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to add to this?
Thanks, Louise. What we really have heard from our small business members and our small business outreach is the desire of small businesses in Somerville to have more control over their spaces than they have now. And if that can be done through owning their buildings or their space, that would be ideal. But if it can be done through better lease negotiations or better education about what they can do if they're taken to the district court over a lease dispute. What they really want is just more security and certainty that they can occupy their spaces and that their spaces are safe in the short or the middle run. That's what we're really trying to research, how we can increase their security. As rents rise and the commercial property market is really hot.
Thank you. I think Christina, who's also the community co-chair, is not present here, so we can move to the creative displacement committee. I know that Michael is here. Michael, are you available to answer this reflection
Pardon me,
question?
I'm so sorry. This is
Oh.
Jessica Eschleman from Union Square Main Street. I'm on the audio line. Can you hear me? Can I offer a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Yes to everything I've heard on this line in so many ways, but I want to put one additional point on the small business displacement. We, of course, are recognizing that so many of those businesses are owned by and employ and, of course, serve Somerville residents. But there's another side to this that I think is worth mentioning, which is that by finding policies to keep our brick and mortar spaces accessible to these independently owned businesses, we're actually helping to preserve consumer choice. And what I mean by this is sometimes when I've been advocating for small business displacement concerns, I've been misunderstood that folks think that I'm saying Assembly Square is bad. And I really think it's important to say that's not the message that Union Square Main Street is promoting or championing. It's that actually we deserve a full range of consumer choices, and that because the formulas and the resources that big box operations often come with are so stacked against those of an independently owned business, we have to intervene in order to protect our commercial corridors, which, as I've heard everybody chime in, is the character of our city and creates third places for us to connect as communities as well as economic opportunity. But I just wanted to highlight that distinction so that there was no misunderstanding that we're saying big box in other places is inappropriate. Thank you.
It's a super important distinction. Thank you, Jessica. We can at this point open it up. If Michael, if you want to take it away, and then we can go to Jen, and then we can open it up to our the rest of our committee as well.
Hi, I'm Jen. I've lived here for 20 years, so I can speak as a long-term resident who actually lives right near the high school, as well as somebody in the arts community. Thank you so much for this presentation. Looking at the graphs, I see so much loss, and the arts community is feeling that loss as well. This area has changed significantly over the past decades, and the amount of loss that we've seen, especially recently, what you feel right now is it's it's so real. It's happening at such a high rate right now. And so it's a mixture of grief and fear in the arts community. And what I would say, because I do want to leave on a positive note, is I would love to see more research with a wider net if you end up having the capacity to do so, to talk to students, to more students. But also when I think about what Somerville I want to live in, I want to live in a Somerville where the people and the artists and the businesses that have had to leave, they have a chance to come back. I want people to have that opportunity. I miss the feeling of community that used to be here. So thank you so much.
Helen, go ahead.
Thanks. I just also, this is like such great work. Thank you so much. I'm Ellen Schachter, and again, I work on residential anti-displacement, and it's really, really sad but great to hear how much our youth are thinking about this issue. I did just want to say one happy note, because I saw that one of the priorities was around more affordable housing for immigrant households. I saw that in your slides, and I did just want to let people know, in case they don't, that this month we're launching the first program, one of the first kind in its states, to give affordable housing vouchers to families that are ineligible for federal housing because of immigration status, to give them some housing vouchers so they can live affordably in Somerville. So I did just want to give some note of hope that, you know, this doesn't mean we're doing everything that we should do and everything we can do, but your feedback is really, really important. And we are trying really hard to figure out creative ways to try to address some of the issues that the students are so, you know, beautifully raising here before us. So thank you for the feedback. Just want to let you know that all of your feedback to us is taken very seriously. And we'll continue to be open to new ideas that folks might have about how we can address gentrification. So thank you.
Wonderful. Penny.
Sure. I just wanted to share some thoughts. Thank you so much for this presentation. I thought it was really powerful and resonant. I think the comment about the high school being wonderful, but I think this maybe was in the chat, but the students thought their own kids would not be able to attend really struck me. I moved to Somerville in 2010 and was displaced in 2022, and you know, most of my friends that are still able to live in Somerville either were able to buy or have had rents that haven't been raised ever and are in really lucky situations. And I work at OHS. I'm really happy to work every day, you know, going beyond luck, doing it with real tangible things and trying to help people stay and not get displaced. But knowing your neighbors, knowing your businesses, kind of having that fabric is so awesome and wonderful. And yeah, thanks for sharing these thoughts and being part of trying to keep that fabric as strong as possible here.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share on the reflection question? I can offer some of my initial reactions to this. I've only lived here about 1.5 years. And then the short time that I have lived here, I can say that I've seen it change a lot. Just on my block, I would say if y'all aren't aware, our city has a high turnover rate for residents in our city. So I believe the statistic is about 60% of the city is either moving in or out every year. So it's pretty, like, every 3 years is a whole new population in our city. I mean, you know, so there are people who stay obviously, but and I see that like every year on my block. When I moved in the winter. So I saw that during the summer, and I'm seeing it throughout the year as well, where even in just my building alone, there's 6 units, but I think I've counted maybe 6 times that people have moved in and out of these units since I've lived here. So this city is rapidly changing. And I think when I think about what is a Somerville I'd like to live in? I think I'd like to. I think about this a lot as a strategic planning and equity manager for the city. I work in the planning department about equitable solutions to some of our city's biggest challenges, and so I think about this specific question a lot, particularly in how like I should be approaching doing my job. And I think for me, what it has kind of boiled down to as an immigrant myself, from a family who immigrated from Ecuador in New York City, back in the 80s, I I think about community a lot. I think about how it takes a lot of community to make the most challenging conditions work. And I think that that's what got us through the 80s. And I think it was that got a lot of people through when they originally came here in the 70s and the 80s in Somerville. And what created such the diversity that this community prides itself in having. So I think that community for me is something that is very I think key instrumental to being able to be what weathers people through some of these challenging times. But we also have to be realistic about like the challenge, just the sheer amount of pressure, the economic challenges we have that we're living in right now are. I think um, it was very hard to get through the economic challenges that faced our communities, that we had coming in the 70s. But the challenges now are like exponentially harder, and this is very real when people say like this is a great high school but my kids probably won't be able to live here. And it's very hard to reconcile trying to come up with solutions that will be able to help people, without also acknowledging that a lot of those also have some tacit impact of exacerbating more gentrification and more displacement. um, but yeah, it's a very difficult concept, very difficult question, to think about, because I think we know what we want in our communities, but it's how do we make that happen, you know, within the structure that has like a very almost omnipresent pressure on everyone, where those who have the least amount of resources and privileges are the ones who are most at risk. And how do we continue to try to both stabilize those populations but also invite people who have been already displaced back? It's such a challenge. I feel like that's the most equitable outcome, but it's um a really really difficult challenge to try to wrap your head around. But we're trying, and I want to really uplift a lot of what the presenters this evening have been talking about this challenge of losing community, losing our connections that kind of make this place more than just the structures that exist in a physical plane. And I really internalize that when we're doing this kind of work with the task force on how we can do what we do, but do it in a way that's equitable towards the people who are closest to these structures. And I really appreciate everyone lending us their research, their perspectives, their concerns and their frustrations regarding um, the current status of our community, and I'm looking forward to trying to continue to come up with solutions together with our folks here at the task force, but also everyone in the city, as well, and finding ways to be able to continue to protect and enhance our communities that are most vulnerable. But I want to open this up to anyone else who wants to add, and also want to throw this back to the youth league to see if they had any follow-ups to our comments or anything else they wanted to add into their presentation.
I think at this point, what we would like to say, at least from the RSJ side, is a special thanks to Brajesh, Jay, Marcia, and Marcus for all of their work on this project. And we're excited to see where it goes. I think now they're willing to or ready to open it up for any questions from the audience on the presentation. And if need be, we can always, go back to a slide. But we'll definitely, and they'll be here to try to answer as questions as best as possible.
I don't see any questions right now in the Q&A. But if any committee members or counselors are have any questions, please feel free. Jen, go ahead.
I have a question. If you do do outreach to a larger population of high school students, what way will you do that? Will that be passing out flyers? Like what's the best way of outreach after doing this smaller group outreach? What have you learned from that?
I would say I think the best way to outreach is through a combination of different ways. In the past, for different ways to outreach, we've done through Xbox slides that get displayed to every student in the school, and I think that's worked well. So getting it to some type of like mass production, so all students are able to see it through Xbox slides and flyers as well around the school, I think that would probably be the best avenue to do so.
There's definitely difficulty with it took a long time for us to get permission to distribute our survey publicly throughout the school with the flyers because there were rules about who could see the data on these students. So I believe that we as Somerville High students were not allowed to see the like raw data from the Google form that we had the survey on. And we had to rely on the Harvard students to code that data and make it completely anonymous. So there would be difficulty with that, but I believe with more support from the city, we could be able to get the survey out to more students and get the high school's help in doing that.
Thank you so much.
We have a question in the Q&A. So there's multiple parts to this. I'm gonna say this one is more aimed towards the RSJ department. Are there any plans to extend the youth part of this process? I'm assuming that might be the youth league. Maybe what's the next steps for the youth league. And just a general statement that we need to make sure that the youth have the tools required to understand these complex programs, and a +1 for the city having to support the community more. But first part of the question, what are the future plans for the youth league?
Yeah, thank you for the question. What we can say is we're definitely dedicated to learning and growing with each iteration of our youth league. So right now we are currently restructuring and figuring out when we'll be launching again for the next cohort and what that will look like, but also cross collaboration with other departments like HHS, making sure that we have the right folks in the room and connecting our youth. Something that we've learned throughout this process is just really trying to get more centralized connections for the youth so that they know who to go to and where they can get information, and so that we as city staff members can better direct folks to the intended audience. So what we can say is that more work will definitely be coming. We'll definitely share out on RSJ's pages and socials when that time comes. And then I think I'm also able to see the question, Louise. So the youth risk data survey, yes, folks are able to see that. I believe that is publicly available on the city websites. So we have that. But really, we rally around that as well to make sure that our youth have the tools to understand some of the complexities of these programs. To know all the different folks who are involved is really important, because we know that knowledge is definitely power. And once we have that database out there, then everyone can engage better, connect better, and actually implement change. But we're dedicated to keeping a space for uplifting youth voice.
I have a question for the youth league. What has been your experience or takeaway from this experience? Overall, would you say that this has been a good experience with the program, the way it was structured? Do you believe that this is an effective way to engage with the civic process? And do you feel in the future that you how do you feel coming away from this uh as for when you came into this program? Do you feel like you are now more empowered as an individual or as a representative from your community, or what is your takeaways from this process? How has it been for you?
I can start. I think this was definitely a learning process for everyone involved, as there hadn't really been a group like this before. We were figuring out a lot of scheduling things with the Harvard students, and for a while, we were pretty much primarily working with the Harvard students on the research project, meeting once a week. Um, and we did have, issues getting the research done in time, which was why we only had a week in the end to push out the survey that we did. Um, and I still don't completely understand a lot about, what resources we have within the city government and, who everybody is and what exists. But we are working on, you know, education on that for us and also making sure that the next group has that.
I can take this. I believe this has been a good experience for me because I've got to learn a lot about Somerville and issues that youth are facing in Somerville right now.
I agree. It's also been a great experience. I've known that gentrification has been occurring in the city, so it's nice to see different perspectives from a wide range of youth. And I think overall it's been very valuable for me.
Great, thank you. If there are no other questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. I know there's also a land use committee meeting this evening where there are several projects that are going to be discussed. So some of our members do want to make sure that they get over there. So we want to give them the time to be able to head over there and participate in that process as well. I invite all of you all as well um, to participate in that process and attend these meetings. These are important meetings that talk about some local projects where we can take some of this information that we learn about gentrification and displacement and really um, put that to work in making sure that our um, counselors and people who are involved in these projects are aware of what matters to you. So please attend our council meetings, our committee meetings, and become more aware and engaged in the process. This cannot happen without you, and this is the main way that we're able to get feedback that we can take action on. So I invite you to continue to engage with us. Follow us on our Summer Voice page. That's again, voice.somervillema.gov/ADTF. For further updates, our next meeting is going to be in May. So you'll be able to follow, track, and get the link to join our last webinar in May through our Summer Voice page. And we will be presenting our presentation of findings at that time. and giving you an update on what our progress has been from the start and getting our committees formed to the end and determining what our scope of recommendations are going to be and what our next steps will be for the task force. So I look forward to giving you guys a better update in May on our progress. And thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. Have a great night.